Now we're talking about a shift from expressionism, and even some of the things we talked about in Soviet realism, to a reaction perhaps simultaneous, happening at the same time, and yet maybe diametrically opposed to expressionism. Post-war expressionism like Erwartung and Pierrot Lunaire, but now we're going to have anti-expressionism. That is the new objectivity and what we will call high modernism. Let me tell you a little bit about this kind of the context for this reaction. So after the 19th century, we saw the boiling over of emotion and the inner psyche. And there was sort of, in the 1920s, an anything goes kind of attitude, not only in the United States with the jazz era, but also in Berlin. This Weimar culture, as it was called, sort of stands for this sort of hedonistic, let it all out, express it all, it's all chaotic, it's all slightly absurd and meaningless. The Weimar Republic was what happened after World War I in Germany. And it's this sort of post-World War I disillusionment, decadence, hedonism that then gives rise to not only expressionism and to things like surrealism in visual art and Dada, which we've already talked about. Just let it out, it's absurd, it's meaningless, we're all just human animals just babbling away. But there's also a reaction against it, a pushback saying, no, those things, that's too, I can't deal with that. I'm going to do the opposite. And instead of embracing chaos and meaninglessness, artists and composers embrace meaning or structure, form, formalism. And instead of saying nothing has meaning, they say, oh, there's meaning here. But shh. It's hidden. You have to work for it. It's not on the surface. As I say, post-war expressionism reacted to the unstable social and emotional environment after World War I with a withdrawal into idealism and formalism. Schoenberg and his Second Viennese School did stay focused on the personal and the spiritual in art. They really still were doing this expressionist style. We will see all of that sort of expressionism in Alban Berg's Wozzeck. We will see both, well, yes, we will see it in Wozzeck. Schoenberg's music, however, at the same time that he's writing expressionism, he also backs away in other works from this expressionist abyss. Pierrot Lunaire, for example, has, while it's full of the inner vision of Pierrot, this ill-fated interpersonal hero quest, it's also full of hidden structure. It is full of the beginnings of formalism. It's detached. It's not in the heat of the breakdown. It's sort of the leftovers after he has crashed mentally. Schoenberg in Pierrot Lunaire is taking one way out of the expressionist maze or labyrinth where you can't find your way because there's no way to find. He takes one way out of that dilemma, how do you have form in expressionism, by relying on the structure of the actual text, the poem. However, composers go more into the musical organization, the structure. Other composers will go further than Schoenberg, although Schoenberg himself sets them upon the way. And that is Schoenberg's idea, if you recall, of the Grundgestalt, the melodic shape, a set of pitches, that is your melodic shape. That becomes now, it's elaborated and expanded upon to say not just selected pitches, but all the pitches that exist, all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale, must be put in order. They must be serialized. It's not a random grouping of just shake them all in, shake up the box, but let me choose which pitch comes first, which pitch comes next. It's like playing bridge or rummy, where you've got a whole handful of 12 cards, and it's not so a matter of which ones did you randomly get, it's a matter of which ones do you put down in what order. That gets you the most points in a game like rummy or bridge or canasta. So take the 12 pitches of the scale, which are now emancipated from keys. B flat feels just as good as B natural. They have equal status in the musical world. And serialize them, put them in an order. That is your basic Grundgestalt, your basic set that can inform your melody and harmony for a whole composition. I'm going to show you an example of how serialism works. I'm going to actually use one of the works on your listening list to generate my initial tone row. So let me step away from the music history for a second and step into a little bit of music theory, because I'm not sure that I'll know exactly how much each of you will have understood or gone into this in the past. It's not a bad idea to think about how serialism requires choices. Serialism is not about using random all 12 pitches in any order to express your inner angst. Serialism's moved on from that inner chaotic expression that exploded the boundaries of tonality. Serialism is about using all the pitches in the order that the composer desires. And the way we desire it has more to do with math and with interval choices and the absolute beauty of nature than it does with emotional choices necessarily, although the serialist composers would also say that there is plenty of emotion in their work. So it's a question of finding out not which pitches to use, but what order they must be used in. One pitch leads to another pitch. Your mathematical choices keep leading to the next thing. So serialism, while it may sound paradoxically chaotic to modern ears, or to classically trained ears, because we've been raised on a diet of tonality, instead, serialism is actually highly ordered. To explain how a matrix, that is, a combination of 12 serial pitches, works in what's called a tone row, the serialization of all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale, I've made a little demonstration for you here in my kitchen, putting together the ingredients of all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. And for the musical example, I'm using the tone row that's generated in Milton Babbitt's 3 compositions for piano, movement 1, which you have to listen to. So what I've done is I've collected, in order, the pitches that appear from measure 1 in the left hand, the first 12 pitches. There they are. That is the row. That's the initial row, or the organizing principle. All 12 of these pitches always appear in this order. I can't go back and play another one. I can't play F again until after I've gotten to the end of this row. So I couldn't go F, D, C, oh, I feel like F again. We're not allowed whimsy here necessarily. We're directed, once we choose the row, we're directed to stick with it. If I go in order from the beginning of the row, B flat, E flat, F, D, that's simply showing the row itself. The row then is organized not by a key, although at the very beginning this certainly looks like B flat major, even the first 5 pitches. But oh no, the 6th pitch says not any sort of major key, and pretty soon it's clear that there is no key intended. Instead, what we have is a series of intervals. The relationships between each individual or each pair of pitches is really what's kind of the glue that holds a row together. So this looks like an ascending perfect 4th, an ascending major 2nd, a descending minor 3rd, a descending major 2nd, an ascending minor second. You could catalog the interval content of the row in that way, and that would actually give you a sense of what it would sound like. That's how you would sing it for skills class, for example. You'd have to go from one interval to the next. If I take this entire row, I could then transpose it up or down any number of pitches I want. Say I transpose it up a major second, that's 2 half steps. Then I would have at the beginning, I'll just do it out loud here, I would have C, F, G, E, D, E flat, A, C sharp, etc. That would be the transposition of 2 half steps, P2. If my row is P0, the transposition up 2 half steps is P2. Babbitt, in his piece, uses the original row, P0, at measure 1 in the left hand, and he also uses it again clearly in the left hand at measure 9. But then he uses, in the very beginning, he uses in the right hand P6. So he takes this initial row and he transposes it up 6 half steps. That happens to be a tritone. What it does is well, hang on, I'll tell you what it does in a minute. So if I take that opening few notes and I transpose them up a tritone, I have E natural, I have A, I then have B, and G sharp, and F sharp. It doesn't matter how I spell them. But that's the pitch content of the right hand in measures 1 and 2. Whenever you transpose a row, the distance between pitches in the row is always constant. This distance will always be some kind of perfect fourth. And when I transpose it, it will always be the same. So this looks like an ascending perfect fourth. If I transpose it up a tritone, then I have E to A. That E to A is still an ascending perfect fourth. There's another way to use this row besides just transposing it. I can take it in reverse order, in retrograde. So I start at the last pitch and I work my way backwards. As the music goes forward in time, I'm using the pitches in this order, in retrograde. This would be R0, is how it's labeled on a grid or matrix. Because we have 12 pitches, and we're going to look at them not only as the ways they can be transposed going from the front or transposed going from the back. There would be, because there are 12 different transpositions, there would be 12 different stacks or 12 different rows that I could generate from P0. I can transpose it a total of 12 different times, all the way from 0 to 11, or as we say in pitch class notation, E for 11. So Babbitt uses that. However, there's another way that we can manipulate the row. We said that this distance at the beginning was going up a perfect fourth. It looks like going up a major second and down a minor third. What if I took the same distance, but I went in the opposite direction? Instead of going up a perfect fourth, what if I go down a perfect fourth? Instead of going up a major second, what if I go down a major second? And then if you recall, I went down a minor third. What if I go up a minor third? If I do that, I end up with what's called the inversion of the row. This is the inversion of P0. So it's I0. Oops, I ran out of blocks. So if I go the same intervals, but in the opposite direction from one pitch to a next, I have inverted the row. Essentially, I've mirrored it. I've done the same things, but in the opposite direction. It operates like a mirror does on an axis of symmetry. It's flipped, like when you look in a mirror and you raise your left hand, but the mirror looks like it's raising its right hand. That is the same principle of flipping or mirroring around an axis of symmetry. So there's I0. If I were to start at the bottom of I0, instead of playing the pitches, and by the way, Babbitt does not use the inversion I0. He transposes it and uses I6 a little bit later in the piece. But he does use an inversion of the row. So this idea of going down a perfect fourth, down a major second. So that would be I0. I could go in this order and use all 12 pitches in this particular order. That would be the inversion. But I could also start at this pitch at E and play my notes E, C, B, D, A, C sharp, etc. until I get to the final 12th pitch, which would be B flat. That is retrograde inversion. Retrograde inversion. This basic structure here is the basic structure for constructing a matrix, and I'm going to show you one on the screen for this very piece. We've taken all the 12 pitches of P0, and we've taken the 12 pitches of the inversion, I0, and then we simply fill it in, and you used to have to do this by hand in theory class, but now, due to the miracles of technology, you can use the online matrix generator, and I'll show you what you get. In Babbitt's piece, he uses R0 in measure 3 in the right hand, R0, reading this first row from the end, from E to A flat to A. He also uses it not just as a melodic strand in measure 3, but if you look carefully at the score in measure 10, he uses it also in trichord chunks. He actually makes chords out of 3-note groupings. He plays this grouping. He plays then the next sonority is a grouping of these 3 notes together, and then he groups these 3 notes together. And finally, the 4th grouping in that measure is a little chord made of F, E flat, and B flat. You might think, oh, that's going to sound very quartal. Well, you listen to it and decide if it sounds quartal in the context.